Hi Guava Bees, and welcome to another episode of the Dear Guava Bean podcast. Remember, submit your questions in the Guava box or on the website and we could be answering yours in the next episode. I'm Francesca and with me is Claire.
Hello.
And today's question is, Dear Guava Bean, I am in need of some advice about working with a coach. A couple of months ago, I decided to invest in one rather than follow tons of courses and losing interest because the course wasn't what I wanted or what I was looking for. I thought if I work with someone who has already reached the level in their business where I want to be, one-to-one, it would be a better way to spend my money because it would save me time and I would get professional help. However, 2 months in, and the contract is for a length of 3 months, I am not happy at all with her and the results. She has given me some assignments and some advice that I followed and implemented, but instead of getting a real strategy in place, learning tricks and various tools of the trade as well as having access to her, I feel like I am still in the same place as I was before I hired her. I honestly want to fire her, and since there is still the final payment outstanding, I'm thinking about not making this payment, which is due this week. But of course, I signed a contract with her. Okay, so I really feel for this person because it must be a really tricky situation to be in. I think that it must be quite disappointing if, you're looking for that help and you're just not getting it. But obviously you've made that sort of almost that promise that you're going to work with them, especially if it's a contracted time with this coach. Now, Claire, I've actually never worked with a coach before, but obviously I have given my advice to other freelancers, not as a coach, I would say, not in a formal sense, but I have actually wanted to give advice to freelancers. I do that as part of my career, and I always think that communication is like one of the biggest things. So what are your first thoughts on this? Because I'll go into mine in a minute, but I'm just curious to know what you think of this question, Claire.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what you think, 'cause it seems like you have a lot that you want to say. I have worked with 2 coaches in the past. I hired a life coach and a business coach, and I actually recorded a From the Desk podcast episode about this just this weekend. So this question is actually very timely because I was just talking about my experience with coaches, and I've had a very similar experience to this lady where, I paid for a service. I thought that by investing in myself in this way, I would speed up time, I would save, a lot of extra work, that a coach would really help me accelerate and get me the answers that I needed. And instead, I didn't really feel like I got what I paid for. I left the experience, kind of feeling very like, meh, I think would be the the overall feeling. And the first time it was easy to be like, okay, I hired the wrong person. I wasn't specific enough. I needed a better coach. But the second time it happened, I was like, maybe I just would be better off investing this money into my business and, doing it in another way. So I haven't hired a coach since then. And honestly, sometimes when my friends ask me for my advice, recently I talked with a friend who was thinking about hiring a coach and it was pretty pricey. And so she was like, do you recommend that I do this? It would help me speed up my business. The coach tells me that I would make this money back within a few months anyways. So it's a good investment. And, I had to tell her my experience, which is that I honestly feel like if I could go back in time and do those things again, I would tell myself, save that money, spend it on your business, because you're going to learn those mistakes anyways. Like, you're going to learn the stuff that you need to learn just by going through the process of being a business owner. You don't have to try to force yourself to grow faster, even though there's a temptation of like, I'll learn faster if I have a coach. Sometimes that is a trap. I feel like sometimes that's a trap we set for ourselves. And sometimes you have to learn these painful, expensive lessons in order to see that. So that's just kind of like my first thoughts on this.
Yeah, so kind of off what you said, like I've never hired a coach before. because I almost feel like exactly what you said. So I personally feel like I've been tempted to hire a coach because in the past I've been kind of lost and not sure where to go next, and actually been really tempted to get the advice of someone who seems to, know what they're doing. They're successful and they want to teach other people. And I'm like, yeah, I'm really tempted by it. And the reason I haven't is because I feel like just because something works for one person and just because they've done it a certain way doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be everyone's path. And I also think that, like you said, you can't skip over those mistakes. Like, there isn't a shortcut to success. And sometimes I feel people get sort of really persuaded and sort of seduced by the idea that if you just part with some money, that actually that's an alternative route. Like, you don't actually have to go through these things and learn your own lessons and learn from your own mistakes. And I feel like that is why I wouldn't personally hire a coach, or certainly why I haven't yet or so far. And it's tricky because it really is, it's going to vary from person to person, but just I feel like there's a lot of value that comes out of learning your mistakes yourself and going things almost like the longer, harder way about it, which sounds like, if you're listening to this and you've thought about getting a coach, like, I'm not saying that all coaches are bad. Of course I'm not. But what I'm saying is it depends what you want from the experience. Like, are you wanting to get some advice and some pointers to learn how to do something yourself? Or are you expecting someone to just kind of do it for you and tell you what you want to hear? Because sometimes I do think that's the latter. And that's when you're going to be disappointed, because I just don't think someone else can tell you what that is, I just, even if you're in the same industry as somebody and you look up to somebody, your path could be so different. And there is a lot of value and life lessons that come from just doing it yourself. And to be honest with you, I think like most people do feel like they don't know what to do next. They don't know how to progress. And that's normal. And I don't necessarily think you need to ask someone to, or like pay someone a lot of money and part with that money to give you those answers. Just sometimes I just don't think that's the way to do it. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I've just always felt like I want to do things myself. I think it's okay to ask for help and guidance sometimes, obviously. And if there's an area in which you want to move into and you want to expand, and a coach can actually help you give that knowledge that you're not able to do, then that's fine. But yeah, basically, I just think it depends what outcome you want, Does that make sense? Because I feel like I'm sort of like spilling out my thoughts and rambling a bit. But yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm not necessarily saying a coach is a bad thing. Of course I'm not. There are some really wonderful people who change people's lives by coaching them. And that's such a wonderful thing. But I really think that if you're looking for a coach, you have to know what you want from it. And you have to be sure that, I guess, that you're going to get that from coaching and not just from continuing on and setting yourself goals and doing it that way.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I also believe that a coach is a wonderful resource for a specific thing that you want to learn. Like, let's say I wanted to learn tennis. I would get a tennis coach because I would not be able to teach that to myself. But if you're already doing business and you're already doing social media, you don't really need a social media coach to come in and teach you that. You can learn that through experience and through trial and error. So there are some situations where you do really save a lot of time and money by hiring a coach. And I think those situations are kind of what you were getting at when you have a specific need or you know exactly what you want. Like, let's say, I want to fix my mindset around money. That's a very specific thing. And so you could go to a money mindset coach and have them work with you on that specific thing. But when it's very general, like business coach or life coach or even health coach, I feel like there's so much room for interpretation that there's no specific outcome that you can hold this coach accountable for. And that's really a big part of getting the results you want. You need to be able to hold people accountable and have these like measurable results that you want to get out of your coaching experience. So without that, or even with that, like even if you go into it with all of these measurable results, there's still a chance that you work with the wrong person and you end up unsatisfied. Like that's just a risk that you're going to take with coaching. It is really risky. So you always have to do your research and try to make sure you get the right coach. But even, even myself, I've got it wrong. I thought I was doing everything right. I asked my friends for their referrals. I got the person that they said was wonderful. I thought I did everything right, and I still ended up disappointed. So now I just choose to look for my answers in different ways. Like in this question, she mentions that I thought if I work with someone who has already reached the level of business where I want to be, it would be a better way to spend my money. And it is true that if you work with someone who's at the level that you want to be, you will really learn from them. But you don't have to pay them to get that knowledge. One way that I like to learn from people is I work for them. I find people who are at the level of business where I want to be, and then I work for them. I do their marketing, or I'd be a virtual assistant, or I'm a copywriter, or I'm a project manager. There are lots of ways to work with someone who has reached a level of business that you want to be, and you can get paid for that. Like I work with some amazing businesswomen who are, at the top of their game, millionaires, making tons of money, doing everything that I want to do. And I don't pay them for their coaching or their advice. I work with them as one of their marketing managers, and I get to see how their business works from the inside, and I get to see how they operate as a business owner without the pressure of like, oh, they're trying to impress me because I'm paying them. I'm a paying client. I get to really see the truth of what goes on inside a business. And I feel like that is where I learn the most. So now that I've had that experience, I always recommend to people, if you can, try to get paid and learn at the same time. Like find the person who you want to learn from, who's doing amazing things. And if you can't work for them, follow them online, read their books, use their free content as much as possible. I've done that with Seth Godin. I've learned a lot about marketing from him. I've learned a lot about business from Marie Forleo. I've learned a lot about finance. You can find these people who are doing great things, and you don't have to pay them anything. You can just absorb their free content also. So there's many different ways that you can get the professional help that you want to get without hiring a coach. I think that's kind of the conclusion that I've reached with my life. Like I don't hire coaches anymore, but if I need to, I'll hire a consultant. Like I hire consultants all the time, but for very specific things. Like I'll hire a marketing consultant, or I'll hire a social media consultant, but very specific things and very measurable outcomes.
Yeah, and I think like I love something you mentioned there, and it was about work. When you actually choose to work with the people that you're looking up to, you see parts of their business, maybe the way they conduct themselves, maybe certain habits they have that just happen organically. Like they're not doing it to impress you, like you said. And I think that's really important, because those small parts that maybe they don't even realize they do, but that you pick up on, is all going to like build into this big picture of how they're actually successful, and like just their method of doing things. It's all small bits that they just do like habitually, right? But if you pay for this knowledge and you don't actually get to see all this behind the scenes stuff, it's just what they want you to see, I don't think that builds like this complete picture, and it doesn't teach you how to kind of adopt that. I feel like it's a very almost like a, I guess, how would I describe it? You only see like the surface of what it really takes to be that successful. And I'm not suggesting that coaches necessarily intentionally hide that. Of course not. But maybe they don't even realize that there are some elements to their work, to their life, to their mindset that they just don't include in like their coaching program or something, which you would learn if you just worked with them or learned more about them through their other materials. So I think that's like a really important part as well. I think, and the reason I think it's important is because back to another thing you said, which is how something is interpreted. So you can go online, you can go on a coach's website, and they're explaining how they're going to help you, and it sounds amazing, like it sounds exactly like what you need, but maybe they've explained it slightly differently, or the way they've explained it means something different to you than what they actually meant, and then you're kind of left feeling, well, actually no, this isn't really what I wanted, because I didn't think it meant this, I thought it meant this, something else. But if you're actually working with someone, you just organically pick up these habits and you just notice what they do. And you end up also in turn, I think, because I've also worked with people I really look up to, and you just naturally learn about what you want from the outcome too. So, for example, you mentioned you've worked with people who are like top of their game, they're millionaires, they're really successful. And maybe in the beginning, someone might want that for themselves. Then they work for someone and they figure out, actually, that isn't really my end goal. Maybe it's I want more freedom. Maybe it's I want to conduct business in a way that makes me feel more confident, or I'm helping people in a different way to how I am currently. I also think that's like a really big thing that comes from working with someone than just being coached by them, because you're actually learning what works for yourself in your own way rather than being told what to do. And I think that's quite important because, we learn differently, people will learn differently from person to person. It could be in a different way. But if you're working with someone, I think that you pick up what you need to and you leave behind what you don't need. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. Coming back to this question now, I see that she's in a situation where she wants to get out of the last month, or at least she wants to get out of the final payment. And that's where the conflict is. Like, she feels like she's not getting what she was promised, and so she doesn't really want to pay it. That's understandable. If you don't get what you feel like you wanted, then you don't want to pay. But if there's a contract, that makes things very tricky. So what would you do if you were in her place and there was this contract and you had 1 month left and one more final payment?
So I would always say that communication is like the most important thing in a situation like this. And we've said it before, but I'll say it again. If there's a conflict or something is not quite what you expected, your automatic thought is to just be like, I want to get away from this situation. So I get it. Like, I get why this person doesn't want to feel like they owe that final payment. But I think it's really important, if you're working one-to-one, especially with this coach, that you actually speak to them. And even though it might be uncomfortable and it can be difficult to be honest because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings and you don't want to have this confrontation with somebody, I still think that being honest and just explaining why it hasn't really reached your expectations in an honest and open way where you can have just a calm discussion about it is so important, because the coach might not understand that you feel this way. They, in their mind, they're seeing it as you're doing all of the, because you mentioned here that you're doing all of the advice and the assignments, and if you're completing those and turning them in and implementing some of the strategies they've given you, they might think everything's fine, but in reality they may not know that you feel unhappy and unfulfilled and not happy with the results. So in my opinion, before you just decide not to pay, I would suggest opening a conversation with them about it. And, that could be in a phone call if, that's an option. It could be in an email, or it could be instant messaging or voice memo, however you're currently communicating with the coach. I would say, please, like, that would be the first step. Because I think not paying for something that's in a contract can kind of open a can of worms, and it might make the situation more unpleasant than it necessarily needs to be. That would be my thought anyway. What about you, Claire? Because I know we've talked about communication so much, so I'd be interested to hear what you would do.
Yeah, well, we're on the same page with communication. I think every freelancer understands the value of communication and the importance of communication whenever resolving conflict. But the first thing I would do is look at that contract. I would read that contract and make sure that there's nothing in there that helps me get out. Like I would be looking for a clause that says if I'm not satisfied with the work, maybe this and this can happen. I would first look at the contract and see how much room do I have here? Do I have any wiggle room? Can I get out of this payment legally? If not, then you have to I'm so into strategy and stuff, and so I would always strategize how to approach it. But I think the best way is, like you said, just being super honest and having a conversation. I would do it on a phone call. I wouldn't do it over text or voice memo, just because it's a sensitive subject. And whenever you say something in text, it can always get a little bit lost in translation. It can come off a little bit cold. And you want to see that person's response so you can have that open and honest conversation. Because if they have so much time to think about their response, it's not really authentic. So I like to have those difficult conversations one-on-one and be able to see the person face to face when I have that conversation, because it's important for the relationship and for trust. I always hate to leave anything on a bad note. Like I would rather pay that person and end the relationship happily than to have it end sour and save the money. For me, the money is not worth the tension and the feelings and just my reputation also. I wouldn't do that to myself. I wouldn't do it to someone else. But I would get on a call and I would just be honest about how I feel, and I would come prepared with real examples. Like this is an example of when I was expecting help and when I didn't get it. This is an example of when I tried to reach you and you didn't follow up for days. So these are, so you have to come prepared with evidence, I guess. It can't just be like, I feel that you weren't there for me. I feel unhappy. I feel disappointed, and therefore I want my money back. You have to be really professional in the situation and treat it very professionally and be like, this is what I agreed to. This is what I got. I really appreciate you. I appreciate all our work together, but I can't help feeling that I'm not really getting what I paid for. So is there a way that we can work this out? Can I pay you half of the final payment? Can I work off the final payment? Can I pay it in some other type of way? I would just try to come prepared with options, because I think it's super important to give people options whenever they're like backed into a corner, kind of. You're putting them in an uncomfortable situation. And so the way to let them out of it easily is by giving them the options. Can we do this? If not, can we do that? If not, let's try this thing. And usually one of those options will work for them. They'll be grateful that you've taken the time to approach it this way and that you've been so thoughtful and you've come up with all these options. And if they're reasonable, if they're reasonable, and if you framed and positioned your argument in a way that doesn't offend and doesn't cause them to be defensive, then most likely they will also try to meet you halfway and work out a deal. I've always been able to work out something where it's a win-win situation for both of us, and that's important. I always start these calls by saying, it's important to me that this is a win-win situation for both of us, because I don't want anybody to leave here unhappy. So whatever it takes, even if it takes me paying the full amount, I'll do that because I honor my side of the contract. But I'm also going to honor my feelings and be open about how I feel. So I think if you are extremely respectful to yourself and to that person, and you have the direct, open conversation like a professional, I think that the other person will respond in a like-minded manner. If they see you handling yourself as a professional, they will handle themselves as a professional. And if they don't, that's on them. You cannot control what other people do. You can only control yourself. So if you try to handle everything as professionally and kindly and respectfully as possible, and if they don't want to meet you halfway, that's on them. Let them go. Let them take that money and go. I believe in karma. I believe that everybody gets, their fair deal in the long run. So I don't sweat anything like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess so, just coming off what you said about having a strategy when you go into a call with the coach, I would just add that I think it's really important not to have your emotions come into it. I know that can be quite difficult and it probably sounds a bit strange, but I think if we lead by just our emotions and we're feeling frustrated that we haven't got what we want, it can come across like a bit of an accusatory tone, maybe not intentionally, but you know, we're just the coach and you as the person who's receiving the help. I think you just have two different perspectives, and no one's saying someone's right or wrong. It's just with something like coaching, I think it's, like we've already said, it's very open to interpretation. So I would just be really mindful of being too emotional about it. Try and lead with your head, and like you've said, be very open to providing some examples to explain, because we have to remember the coach as well always wants to provide the best service and like the best results basically for their clients, and they may be really grateful for this feedback, because even though obviously you're not getting the results you want, the coach will actually probably really value you being honest, because it allows them to maybe look at how they're wording their services, how they approach their clients and that kind of thing. So there is a positive coming out of this as well. Don't look at it as necessarily necessarily a bad thing. And I just think that your advice, Claire, is probably spot on, and just to be really I guess take a very strategic approach, like look at the contract and, come prepared, I think is really important. But yeah, I think, I always like to make sure that I'm not, I don't like conflict. So I always like to make sure, like you said, and so I think we're very similar here, is just making sure that the discussion is open and honest and that you can leave on a good note. So that would be my advice. As I say, I've not worked with a coach before, but I do know what it's like to feel like you're not getting what you want from a situation. And it's always really important to remember that the other person may not be totally aware of the situation and how you're feeling. So that communication line should always be open, in my opinion. It's really important.
Yeah, communication is everything. And like you said, conflict is difficult. I don't think anybody is comfortable or like is good with conflict. It makes us all uncomfortable on some level, but that's just a sign that it's an important thing that needs to happen. You can't run away from uncomfortable situations, but you can find calm solutions. You can find professional ways out of every bad situation, I believe. And one thing that I've always used that's helped me get out of sticky situations is just providing the person with options. I think whenever people, whenever you put someone on the spot, it's an uncomfortable place to be. And so you have to give them an easy way out of that spot. You're putting them in the hot seat. You need to give them a quick way out of that. So the best thing that's worked for me is to always come prepared with options to this person. I usually come with at least 3 options. Can we do this? Let's do option A or option B or option C. And I let them choose. And it gives them some measure of control in the situation. They don't feel like it's happening to them. Instead, it's a conversation, it's a discussion, and they get to choose how they want to proceed. And so I think it's very important to put the ball back in the client's court after you've had that conversation with them, after you've made your position clear. Then you say, okay, these are the solutions that I've come up with. Which one would you prefer? And then let them choose a solution or create their own option as a solution, But once you've identify the problem, the next thing is to move on to the solution as fast as possible. Like, don't spend time. Everybody hates conflict, so don't spend time in that conflict space any more than necessary. Say what you need to say, listen to the person, and then move into conflict resolution, which to me always looks like options. Here are your options. What do you want to do? And then I let them make that decision. And usually that allows them to have a way that benefits them. I always try to give an option that is fair to both people. And so they get to choose what they want. And it always ends up, for me at least, we always end up on a happy note. We leave with the relationship intact, which is the most important thing for me. I don't know why I care so much about relationships and stuff, but I do think money is not as important as your friendships with people. Even if it's a coach who didn't give you the results that you want, that's still a person and a freelancer who has, stuff that they need to work on and stuff that they care a lot about. And I don't want to disrespect them. So I think if you go into it with that mindset of like, the money is not the most important thing, it's the person and our relationship, and making sure that we leave on a friendly note. Like I said, I always want to make sure it's a win-win for both people. And if you can turn this sticky situation into a win-win situation for both of you, that seems like the ultimate victory. And so that's always my approach. I'm always looking for a win-win situation, that they leave happy, I leave happy, everyone is happy. I know it's idealistic. It doesn't always work out that way. But I think if you go into it with the expectation like, oh, this is going to be difficult, she's not going to want to give me the money back, that is not going to help. But if you go into it with a mindset like, this is going to work, we're going to find a solution, you're going to be happy with this, I'm going to be happy with this, I think that's the right way to approach it. And that's always worked for me. Like, I've always been able to end even the stickiest and the ugliest confrontations. I feel like I've always been able to end them at least on a professional, friendly note.
Right, exactly. I think I can't really add anything to what you said, Claire, because to be honest with you, it's exactly what I would have said. I mean, nobody wants these scenarios. Like, in an ideal world, yeah, it'd be lovely if like the coaching was exactly what you wanted and, the end, but it can't be like that, can it? And it's like, when I was talking about emotions, I feel like when you feel like you're going to hurt someone's feelings, or you just feel like you're going to be creating this drama, you go on the defense because you don't want to come across as a bad person. You don't want to hurt that person's feelings, but then your emotions come into it. You end up like, you might say something a certain way where, because you're feeling like frustrated, it might upset the other person. So yeah, I'm the same as you. I know that you can't always make everyone happy, and that's fine, but I agree. I just don't think the money is that important if you're going to be making someone upset. Like, I always try and look at it and turn the situation around and try and put yourself in their shoes. Like, I'm quite empathetic, so I always try and look at it from their point of view. Like, how would you feel if you'd been offering something like your service to someone and you thought it was great and they didn't tell you that they weren't happy and then they didn't pay you? You'd be really upset. And so I think it's really important, just as we've already said, I can't really add anything to it, but just to be, open and honest and just talk to them and respect each other and listen to each other's points of views, because neither one of you is right or wrong. It's just that you have a different perspective on the situation. And so once you're clear about how you're both feeling and what options, like you said, are best for both of you, that's going to be the best outcome. And it, like you say, it's not always going to be the outcome that you expect, but if you can agree on something and it just saves and preserves that friendship and that relationship, then that is so worth it. And you never know where that may lead in the future. So that's why it's so important to value that relationship and try and figure it out before you go down the route of not paying somebody. Even if you're not happy with something,
Yeah, always try to put yourself in that person's shoes and think about how you would want someone to treat you in that situation. No matter how uncomfortable it is, I would always want someone to be honest with me. That's something that's very important to me. I value honesty and I'm willing to forgive almost anything if the person is really truly honest. And so I think honestly you can get more respect from people that way by dealing with these things head on, being a professional, being really honest and showing them how important it is to you. I think that when you handle it this way, with, honesty and respect and with a lot of consideration, I think that you end up gaining their respect. And I know that, you know, often we're afraid of people thinking less of us if we ask to get out of a payment or say that we're not happy about a service. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you approach it right, then you can end up turning a negative situation into a positive situation.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you, because I think also there's nothing worse than so conflict is one thing, but I think if there's anything worse than conflict, it's just like leaving this awkward situation just like festering and not talking about it, and it gets worse. Like it's like ripping off a plaster or a band-aid, just I think it's just good to get it out in the open and just discuss it and then come to like a mutual agreement. I think that is, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I know it sounds easy when we say it. It sounds so much easier for me now talking about it, but when I started, I had such a hard time with conflict resolution. Like it would freak me out. I would get, whenever I had any type of tension with people, it would really, really bug me. It would make me unhappy for the day. It would stay in my mind for hours or days. And now it's just not worth the stress. Now I'm at the place in my life where I'm like, I don't want to stress you out. I don't want to take on unnecessary stress. Let's talk about it. Let's be adults. I'll treat you like an adult. You treat me like an adult, and we will both walk away happier and with a more healthy relationship.
We hope you enjoyed listening to the Dear Guava Bean podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Guava Bean on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for updates and new episodes. As always, our goal is to empower you with the information, inspiration, and direction you need to achieve financial freedom through online work. For more content like this, join us in the Guava Bean Freelancer Toolbox. Just go to guavabean.com to start your free trial now. Thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. See you in the next episode.